Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We'll be waiting a couple minutes before we start. In the meantime, me and my colleagues will be promoting everybody from attendee to panelist. To accept an invitation, you'll be able to turn on your cameras, turn on your mics during Q&A portion and participate in the discussion. So please accept when we invite you. If you do not get an invitation and you'd like to be promoted, just raise your virtual hand and we'll go back and promote you again. Thank you. And just before we start, I'll reiterate, if you'd like to turn on your cameras and your microphone during the Q&A portion, please raise your virtual hand. We'll go back and promote you. If you want to stay as an attendee, feel free to submit all your questions and comments either to the Q&A section or the chat, and they'll be addressed. Thank you. I think, Mehak, we can get it started.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the ISGAP Holocaust and Literature Seminar Series. Today, we are very honored to have with us Professor David Patterson, who is a Senior Research Fellow at ISGAP and a member of the Executive Board of the Annual Scholars Conference on the Holocaust and Churches. He holds the Hillel A. Feinberg Distinguished Chair in Holocaust Studies at the Ackerman Center for Holocaust Studies, UT Dallas. He has lectured at universities on 6 continents and throughout the United States. He is the winner of National Jewish Book Award, the Correct Jewish Book Award, the Hadassah Myrtle Wreath Award, and the Holocaust Scholars Conference Eternal Flame Award. Professor Patterson has published more than 40 books and 250 articles, essays, and book chapters on anti-Semitism, the Holocaust, and the Jewish studies. His most recent publication includes 18 Words to Sustain a Life, published this year. It's an honor to have you with us, Professor Patterson. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Mehak. Welcome, everyone. And thank you for this opportunity to spend a little time with all of you. My topic today is called Night, page 1. Night, the memoir by Elie Wiesel. And what appears on the first page of Night. Many years ago, I had a student, many years ago, who gave me a copy of Night, and I'd never read Elie Wiesel, so I started reading it, and I was drawn into it. You know, it's been said that to read Wiesel is to burn with him, and so it happened with me, from page to page, book to book. So I started reading more and more. As he wrote more, I read more. But I realized just from reading the first page of Night, there were several things referred to that I didn't understand at the time. And if I didn't understand page 1, I wasn't understanding the rest of it. Wiesel once said to me that the opening line in a novel should contain the whole novel. And I think it is with his work that page 1 of Night contains his work. It contains his legacy, his Hasidic legacy. Now, Night was initially published, as you may know, in 1956 in Yiddish in Buenos Aires under the title Und die Welt hat geschwiegen, which is And the World Remains Silent. It was then published with the help of Francois Mauriac in a French edition in 1958. The French edition was about 121 pages. The original Yiddish edition was just under 300 pages, but it was from an 800-page manuscript. Then in 1960, the first English edition was published. Now, on the first page, there are 7 references to images and ideas that are really crucial to understanding who Elie Wiesel is, what is driving him, and what his message is. The number 7, of course, has deep mystical significance, and Hasidism itself is steeped in Jewish mysticism. 7, just for one thing, pertains to 7 days of creation. And in the Holocaust, you have an anti-creation, so to say. So his allusions to, these 7 allusions are allusions to a tradition that was turned over for obliteration. You recall also the reference to his first night in the camp, when he said, the first night turned his life into one long night, 7 times sealed. Now, the Christian reader may think of, the book of Revelation, the famous reference to the 7 seals of the mysterious book. But I think in Wiesel's case, it's more likely a reference to the 7 seals that the early Kabbalists used to refer to, that the 7 seals that seal the book of creation, that harbor the secrets of creation. I'm sure Eliezer at 15 was quite unaware of the book of Revelation in the Christian scriptures. This Isaac of Ackerman, famous Kabbalist, is known for this, the 7 seals, and his discourse on the 7 seals. And he was a big influence on the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism. So what are the 7 allusions on page 1? The first is the Hasidic house of prayer. Then the divine suffering. The Shekhinah in exile. Shekhinah is the divine presence as it enters this realm. It's feminine presence. Shekhinah in exile. The 4th is Kabbalah. The 5th is the redemption of the Shekhinah and humanity. Then allusions to the Talmud, and finally the destruction of the temple. Hasidic house of prayer. What does Hasidic mean exactly? How are Hasidic Jews different from other Jews? Where do they come from? On one level, the Hasidic Jews embrace the traditional observances of Judaism. They're strictly observant, but with a dose of Jewish mysticism to inform the mind and to inflame the soul. The Hasidim are souls on fire. It's one of Elie Wiesel's books about the Hasidim. It arose with the coming of the Baal Shem Tov. Israel ben Eliezer was his name. He appeared on the scene of Eastern Europe in the aftermath of the Khmelnytsky massacres of 1648 and 1649 in Poland and the Ukraine. The Baal Shem Tov died in 1760, just to give you, the time frame. In the Khmelnytsky massacres, which took place during an uprising, a war between the Roman Catholic and Orthodox Christians, it left 100,000 Jews dead. 90% of the Jews of the Ukraine were slaughtered. In the aftermath, then you have the trauma of the false Messiah Shabbatai Tzvi, who died in 1676. And he duped several thousand Jews into following him to the Holy Land, only to convert to Islam when they were detained by the Turks. Okay, so when the Baal Shem Tov appears in the early 18th century, East European Jewry is in a state of despair. They're impoverished. They don't know what to think, what to believe. Many of them do not. Most of them do not have the luxury of learning. So here comes the Baal Shem Tov to battle despair, loneliness, isolation, and his weapons were gratitude and joy, precisely in a time when everyone was blind to anything for which to be grateful or anything to rejoice in. So Elie Wiesel says that Hasidism was meant to combat fear and solitude. Hasidism defined itself in its relation to its members, to one another, in terms of love exclusively. Okay, this is the Hasidic house of prayer. How does the relationship manifest itself in terms of love? As Wiesel says, this is the very substance of Hasidism. The holy man may not necessarily look holy. He may appear as a peasant, a wanderer, a worker, a merchant. Moshe the Beadle, right? The holy ones, Elijah, the Messiah, they appear to us in the most unlikely of disguises. Wiesel says elsewhere that, what is Hasidism if not the belief that man must have faith in God and people? You suffer, pray to God, but speak to your friend. And these are the words coming from someone who wrote his memoir, and the world remains silent. Someone who is urging faith in humanity, faith in God, faith in people. Okay. As a Hasid who attended the Hasidic house of prayer, Wiesel struggles to open a path to the Holy One that would traverse the darkness of the night to embrace the human one, the human one. If the love that defines Hasidism is the love of God, the only way to express that love is through a love of the other human being. For the sake of what? Wiesel explains, saying, every encounter quickens the steps of the Redeemer. Let two beings become one and the world is transformed. That is the new idea introduced to Jewish life by Hasidism. So you can see the radical contrast between the vision of humanity on the part of the murderers and on the part of those who were targeted for murder. Okay, the Hasidic Jews, in Wiesel's case. What about the house of prayer? Just the word house. It's not a synagogue, but a house of prayer. Okay, house is the first letter of the Torah is a bait or a bait. The letter bait means house or a dwelling place. The meaning of creation is given in this first letter of the Torah. The meaning of creation is to make this realm into a dwelling place for the Holy One, to make this realm into a house of prayer. The Nazis often gathered the Jews of a shtetl into their house of prayer and set it aflame. The Nazis rendered the Jews of Europe homeless before they slaughtered them, consigning them to a camp or a ghetto or forcing them into hiding. Okay. The Nazis desecrated, you remember, at night, the house of prayer at Siget. The altar was smashed, where they were gathered into the house of prayer for deportation. As for prayer, tefillah is the Hebrew word. Tefillah is not supplication or petition. Tefillah is reckoning, confrontation. It's a wrestling. The cognate naphtali means wrestling. So the Hasidic house of prayer is a house of confrontation. The memoir Night is itself a house of confrontation. It's reminiscent of one of the Hasidic tales that Wiesel would tell about the beadle, like Moshe the beadle, who would run into the house of prayer and cry out, "Master of the universe, I am here, but where are you?" Elie Wiesel's writings are written as prayers. His novel, The Town Beyond the Wall, is divided into prayers, not chapters. So his writings as a form of prayer frame this kind of reckoning and confrontation that is tefillah. Without this prayer, without this tefillah, there is no reckoning, there is no accountability, and there lies the true horror. What would our lives be if there were no reckoning? Okay. Wiesel once said in an interview, he said, when he was asked about his life, how do you carry on your life? And he said, I go on breathing from minute to minute, from prayer to prayer. So, the Hasidic master, Nachman of Bratslav, once said, make my tales into prayers. And that's what Elie Wiesel is doing with his work, starting with night. What about the divine suffering? What can that mean? Divine suffering? God suffers? I once gave a lecture on evil and God's suffering, and I tried to explain that according to Jewish teaching, God suffers with every act of evil. God commands us not to murder because the Infinite One suffers infinitely each time we raise our hands against our neighbor. And I had one of the questions in the audience was from a philosophy professor. He was from Scotland, and he was very indignant and said, "God suffers? Why, it's absurd. God can't suffer." If the suffering of God is absurd, then the suffering of the human is absurd, at least from a Jewish standpoint. If the claim that God can suffer from the evil that human beings perpetrate is an absurdity, as the prophet Isaiah says, in all their suffering, he suffers, right? Then the God of Abraham, the God of the covenant, is an absurdity. If that's the case, then the divine prohibition against murder is an absurdity. So the meaning of human suffering in Jewish teaching lies in the divine suffering. The Talmud teaches that when a person suffers, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, cries out, "Oh, woe my head! Oh, woe my arms!" Levinas comments, Emmanuel Levinas, philosopher, comments on the divine suffering. He says, it's the suffering of the God who suffers both through man's transgression and through the suffering by which this transgression can be expiated, purified, cleansed. So you have, this is the meaning of the outcry that you see recurring in the work of Elie Wiesel. He says, whoever kills becomes God. Whoever kills, kills God. Each murder is a suicide with the eternal, eternally the victim. God, too, can become a victim. I mean, the most powerful scene, perhaps, in Night is the hanging of the child, right? Who can forget it? When the inmates, the prisoners, are gathered to witness the hanging, and a prisoner standing next to Eliezer says, "Where is God? Where is he now?" And Eliezer says, "Where is he? Here he is hanging on these gallows." The suffering of the children and the suffering of God are of a piece. The Zohar says that the children are the face of the Shekhinah. The children are the face of the Shekhinah, the divine presence. So the divine suffering is central to the Hasidic concern. It's central to Elie Wiesel. It's central to understanding Night. It's central to understanding the hanging of the child, which comes at the center of the memoir. God roars over his city in suffering, as one of the Rebbe of the Warsaw Ghetto says, Kalonimus Kalmish Shapira. How does he suffer? How does he roar? How does God roar? He roars through the cry of his people and through the screams of mama that reverberated through the camps and the ghettos to shatter the souls of the Jews. Screams that undermine the very fabric of creation. So Wiesel sees the divine suffering in the human suffering. They are interconnected. They're interconnected. What about the Shekhinah in exile? The Shekhinah, the divine presence, is like a mother figure. She is associated with Rachel in the prophet Jeremiah. Rachel, who was weeping over her children because they were murdered. They were no more, and she refused to be comforted. When the Jews go into exile, the Shekhinah goes with them, we're taught. So the Shekhinah is the indwelling presence of the Holy One. And so we may ask, how can there be a place where she does not dwell? Where does she go from? Is the divine presence not omnipresent? Now, speaking of the exile of the Shekhinah, Wiesel makes the following statement. He says, Shekhinah in exile, Shekhinah exiled from herself. God abandons himself, says Wiesel. This is a very beautiful, poignant, and tragic theme. Shekhinah forsakes God so as to return to us. Once the world has been created and men are suffering, God wants to suffer with us. That's why he allows his Shekhinah to leave him, so as to suffer in his name, with him, with his creatures. The exile of the word, the Galut HaDibur, says Wiesel, is also part of mysticism, as is the existence of exile itself. On the divine and universal scale, the cosmic scale, everything is in exile, including speech. Now, the end of quote. The faculty of speech is the image and likeness in which the human being is created. The faculty of speech, the word, is associated with the Shekhinah. The presence of the Shekhinah in our midst is the presence of a divine word, which enables us to speak, is the idea. The Holocaust is an assault on the word, the tearing of meaning from words. Okay. So speech, language, the word constitute an entry of the Shekhinah into this realm. Hence, Elie Wiesel's meticulous care for the word and his own effort to restore the bond between word and meaning, which is the bond between human and human, where meaning is torn from words, where words like left, right, selection, oven take on new meanings. Human is torn from human. And only the restoration of the bond between word and meaning can draw the Shekhinah out of exile. The primary way of bringing that about, restoring the connection between word and meaning for Wiesel, is through prayer. Wiesel describes prayer as the substance of language and the language of silence. Those of you who know Wiesel's work know that silence is a recurring theme. Wiesel used to cut, as he told me once, 3/4 of what he wrote. 3/4 of what he wrote. He said to me, you have to write it in order to take it out. He's trying to convey a silence without which the word has no meaning. Okay. Next, we have the mention of the Kabbalah. The Kabbalah literally means what has been received. It's the received tradition. Along with the Mishnah, which is the core text of the Talmud, the Mishnah and Midrash, the Kabbalah is one of the three main manifestations of the oral Torah. There are numerous schools of Kabbalistic thought, but Kabbalah overall is primarily concerned with creation, what's called the Maaseh Bereshit, the actions of the beginning, in the chapter 1 of Genesis, and the Maaseh Merkavah, chapter 1 of the prophet Ezekiel. Ezekiel's vision of the chariot is a vision not only of creation, we're taught, but the meaning of creation. The Kabbalah that most influenced Hasidism is Lurianic Kabbalah, which stems from Tzfat or Safed in the 16th century. Safed is in Israel. And that is the line of Kabbalistic thinking that had the main influence on Hasidism. The ultimate meaning of Kabbalah is to hasten the coming of Messiah. We fathom not just the mystery of creation, but the meaning of creation, so that we may bring about the coming of the Messiah. And so the Messiah is one of the characters that appears throughout Wiesel's writings. Okay. And the appearance of the Messiah in his writings goes back to this reference to Kabbalah on the first page of 9. Why did he want to study Kabbalah with Moshe the Beadle? It's to hasten the coming of the Messiah. Okay. So we have in this reference to Kabbalah on the first page of 9, we have a seed of what might enable Wiesel himself to move beyond the last page of 9. What might enable him to emerge from the kingdom where everything is engulfed in night and darkness, the darkness of the ninth plague of Egypt, in which no one could see the face of his neighbor. It's the ultimate redemption. So, beholding the face of our fellow human being is central to bringing the Messiah, which is central to the project of redemption. So brings me to the next term, redemption of Shekhinah and humanity, the fifth allusion in 9. Why is the Shekhinah in need of redemption? Redemption from what? What does her redemption have to do with the redemption of humanity? Years after he wrote Night, he wrote a novel called Twilight, in which the main character, Raphael, is a scholar of Kabbalah, of Jewish mysticism. And it says in that novel that of Raphael, the main character, it says, long ago in Rovidok, the old man with the veiled eyes persuaded him that it was possible for one man to die in another man's place, and that divine redemption depends on human redemption. So where lies the path of to the redemption of the divine presence of the Shekhinah and the humanity created in the image and likeness of the Holy One? According to Baal Shem Tov, it lies in fighting sadness with joy and despair with gratitude. That Elie Wiesel would place such emphasis on joy and gratitude after what his eyes had seen is extraordinary. And yet, that's what's at the core of the redemption of the Shekhinah and humanity. At the core is joy and thanksgiving, like in Psalms 100. Come to God with songs of praise and filled with joy and thanksgiving. Gratitude, even again, when you see nothing to be grateful for. There's a Hasidic saying that says, in all the world, there is only one place where a great treasure is hidden, and that place is the spot where you're standing. But how do you see it? You see it with eyes filled with gratitude, being grateful before you see what there is to be grateful for, and that's how you behold it. You see this treasure not just lying at your feet, but sitting in your lap and hugging you around the neck. So Wiesel says a Jew defines himself by gratitude. A Jewish philosopher, he says, was once asked, what is the opposite of nihilism? And he said, Dayanum. It is sufficient. The ability to be thankful for what we have received is the opposite of nihilism, the opposite of meaninglessness. And indeed, the word Jew, Yehudi, means one who is grateful. One who is grateful. Let me go on to the sixth allusion, the allusion to the Talmud. When Wiesel says that he would study the Talmud by day. By day, he would study the Talmud. Indeed, he doesn't mention it in night, but in one generation after, if you know that memoir, written 10 years later, he says that he studied Talmud by day with a rabbi, a former Rosh Yeshiva from Galicia, whose name he doesn't remember, but who had memorized all 63 tractates, all 6,200 pages of the Talmud. This rabbi in the camp urged him to protect your soul. Protect your soul. How? By studying Talmud. And the rabbi said to him, this is in Auschwitz, he said, here too the Talmud would serve as a refuge. You'll study it the way it was taught long ago in Surah and Pumbedita in Babylon, right? From memory, which is how the Talmud, the oral tradition was studied. And so this rabbi then asked him, where did you leave off when you were studying the Talmud before you were sent to Auschwitz? And Eliezer told him the tractate on Shabbat, third chapter. And this rabbi said, good, let's continue. We have no time to lose. And he knew the tractate by heart, and he picked up third chapter, tractate Shabbat, and began learning. So even in the anti-world, where everything conspired against it, there was Talmud study. Wiesel studied for more than 20 years with one of the world's great Talmudists, Saul Lieberman. And Saul Lieberman was world famous, world renowned. Wiesel regarded him as the greatest of his teachers. Saul Lieberman was a mitnagid. He was an opponent of Hasidism. And yet here's the Hasid and the mitnagid learning together twice a week in 2-3 hour segments. And these are two men with very busy schedules. They set aside 6 hours a week to learn Talmud together. And he taught him, Saul Lieberman, Wiesel relates that Lieberman taught him that with God, anything can be said. Without God, nothing is heard. Without God, what is said is not said. Without God, nothing is heard. Without God, what is said is not said. For a Jew, without God, what is written is not written. Without God, neither the written Torah nor the oral Torah is Torah. Without God, there is no Talmud, no teaching, no meaning, no learning. I could say much more about the Talmud, but let me, in the interest of time, go to the seventh allusion, the allusion to the temple. By night, he said, by day he would study the Talmud, and he says, by night I would run to the synagogue and weep over the destruction of the temple. This was not uncommon among Hasidim. Eliezer is not a nutcase here. You going in the middle of the night to weep over the temple? What are you doing? Weeping over the destruction of the temple, according to mystical tradition, according to Hasidic teaching, and from some lines anyway, is part of hastening the redemption, the coming of the Messiah, returning the Shekinah from exile. Now, in what does the destruction of the temple consist? And why weep over it centuries later? The destruction of the two temples, the first in 586 BCE and the second in the year 70 CE, is called a churban in Hebrew. It's a Hebrew word in Yiddish used to refer to the Shoah. Some call the Shoah the third churban. Eliezer is weeping not only over the first and second churban, but also over the third churban, prophetically, before the third churban had been completed. He was sent to Auschwitz in late May 1944 with the deportation of the Hungarian Jews, by which time most of the Jews had been murdered already. In Anima Amin, I believe, Anima Amin, a book-length song that Elie Wiesel wrote. It's beautiful. There's a passage that says, with each hour, the most blessed and most stricken people of the world numbered 12 times 12 children less, and each one carries away another fragment of the temple in flames. The temple in flames. So the destruction of the temple is the destruction of the divine light. It's the destruction of meaning, the divine presence that emanates into the world from Jerusalem and from Zion. The Torah goes forth from Zion and the word of God from Jerusalem, from the temple. The darkening of that light constitutes the night that Elie Wiesel endured, and that the title that his memoir bears. The destruction of the light of the Holy One is the night that descended upon his soul. And I think I should end there and take questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. And as always, it was thought-provoking, fascinating. Professor, oh yeah, we do have a couple of questions. So Charles, just go ahead.
David, I appreciate your comments. I actually had the privilege, I speak a fluent Yiddish, and I read the book, The Welt hat geschwiegen, in the original in Yiddish.
Excellent.
Which is extremely powerful because he has conversations with God, which is extremely touching, if that's the right word. I don't know what the right words are. This book is actually a book that many people read because it's a GP version of the Welt hat geschwiegen. It's a much more narrowed down version of the original work.
Mm-hmm.
Question I have for you is, how do you make this work more impactful for what's going on today?
Well, the excellent question. I teach courses on the Holocaust and on anti-Semitism. And in each case, I ask my students, what are the Nazis trying to annihilate in the annihilation of the Jews? And what is the anti-Semite anti? I think understanding what the anti-Semite is anti can shed a lot of light on the nature of the evil that is sweeping the world now in pro-Hamas demonstrations. And what are you pro when you're pro-Hamas, right? What's its, to put it another way, understanding what's at stake can help us sense the urgency of acting and speaking. We can't remain silent. The world can't remain silent. What's at stake is the holiness of the other human. What's at stake is the divine suffering. God himself, meaning itself. So what's targeted for annihilation, whether it's from Hitler or from Hamas, is the millennial testimony that the Jewish people represent by their presence in the world. Hamas denies that there was a temple, right? Many of them. What's that? So that's part of this. It's an assault not just on a people, but on the Holy One himself, I think.
Let me interject for a moment, because what's happened is that
Go ahead.
You have the college presidents, or I'm sure you watched the congressional hearings, which was the most disgusting thing I've ever watched, where we had people legitimizing genocide against the Jewish people. We have all types of what I call reverse causality, where the perpetrator becomes the victim. The Hamas was the perpetrator, and now they become the victim. We have all types of narratives being created that would invert what Elie Wiesel wrote. And this has to be, and I'm wondering how you take your scholarship and make it more contemporary in a manner that can elevate the narrative, not in an academic sense only, but more in a practical sense. Because we are dealing with humanity now. We're not dealing with just books. We're dealing with human. Even though I'm a person who believes in academic literature, this is more than academic literature. We're dealing with now a practical, global assault on the Jewish people now.
Yeah, absolutely. The academic literature has real implications. What begins in the academy bleeds into the streets very, very quickly. But at the heart of this is the question of what constitutes the holiness of the human being. It's not just that the anti-Semites have one view and the Jews another. Modern thinking, modern thought, which is, when I say modern, in Enlightenment on, is a way of thinking that thinks God out of the picture and that makes the Jew, more and more threatening to their premise. That the premise is that holiness of the human lies in power, in race, in class, in gender, in other accidents, right? This is a way of thinking, the wokeism that sometimes is called. This is a way of thinking that pervades the academy. So while it is shocking that the presidents of these prominent universities can't condemn anti-Semitism and the call to genocide of the Jews, it is shocking, but it's not surprising given the intellectual and ideological environment where they live. So it legitimizes violence. It legitimizes the destruction of Israel. As Israel is demonized as perpetrators of genocide, racist, colonialist, apartheid state, it becomes more and more morally required to eliminate the Jewish state. What is the moral demand when you're faced with an apartheid state? What do? So the anti-Semitism has become morally required. You cannot be considered a good person if you support the existence of the Jewish state. And this is a result not just of centuries of theological anti-Semitism, but of modern ideological anti-Semitism. There's a lot more to be said, and I spent a semester on this matter, but thank you. That's an excellent question. Keep that question going.
Next up, we have David. Please go ahead, unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Patterson. Just a little bit of background. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I wrote and produced the film that was used to raise the money for the United States Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., and I've done other projects that have to do with Holocaust survivors. On December 5th, the Economist YouGov research organization released a poll that the results were so shocking to me that I actually wrote them to make sure that it wasn't disinformation that had been released. And they confirmed the results that 20% of 18 to 29-year-olds in the United States believe the Holocaust was a myth, and 30% of that group were unsure as to whether it was a myth or not. And to me, that was just absolutely shocking information because of all the energy that wonderful professors like you, museums around the country, the Wiesenthal Center, numerous Holocaust memorials, including the one in Dallas. Where have we failed? I mean, I feel that the work that I did as a filmmaker is an abject failure if the 18 to 29-year-old, 50% of them either think the Holocaust was a myth or they're not sure. What can we do about that?
Well, yeah, but just to add to your point, I think it's about 22, 23 states require Holocaust education in their high school curriculum, including Texas. And I've done many workshops with high school teachers who don't know anything about the Holocaust. They want to teach. They often teach night, but they don't know anything about night. They certainly don't know anything about the 7 terms, illusions that I discussed. So they don't know who the Jews are. I mean, they tell a story of something terrible happening to Jewish people, but they never get at what is targeted for annihilation. There's a scene in The Book Thief where Liesel, the little girl who's with a German family in the Nazi period, her father gets knocked down in the street by the Gestapo, when the Gestapo are taking away a Jewish shopkeeper. Liesel, who's like 8 or 9, goes back into their cellar where she lives and sees Max, a Jew whom they're hiding in the cellar. And she asks him, "Why do they hate my father? Why do they hate the Jews?" And Max said, "Because we remind them of their humanity." Now, getting at that question, what are you reminded of when you're reminded of your humanity, and why would you kill somebody for reminding you? That has to be part of the study of the Holocaust. As Elie Wiesel said, it's an assault not just on the human being, but the very idea of a human being. It's an assault on God. To the extent that we leave God out of it, we lose our memory. Okay? And God is the first one to go. The trend is to the woke trend is to de-Judaize the Holocaust, placing the Jews into the category of victims in general, if they are there at all, right? So we've gone wrong to the extent that we've de-Judaized our learning, and then that we've gotten rid of God in our learning. You don't have to believe in God. You just have to deal with God, right? As Elie Wiesel said, you can accept God or reject God, but you can't ignore God. Certainly not in this. Not when you see that, Hitler gave an interview in 1922 that said to Joseph Hell, was the journalist, he said, when he comes to power, he's going to eliminate the God of Abraham and his life-denying 10 Commandments. As we devalue anything like the Ten Commandments, we devalue history itself. We devalue Jewish teaching and testimony. Part of this lies in a postmodern notion that there is no history. There's only narrative. There's only narrative. Okay. And one narrative is as good as another. And as I say to my students, if this doesn't scare you, then you don't understand it. So I don't know, what do we do about it? It's like trying to save the starfish on that have washed up on the beach, right? The thousands of starfish, we throw one at a time back. This one we can save, this one we can save. But I can tell you, it's a huge challenge. It's daunting to change not just what we know, but how we think. That's at the core. It's not what we know, it's how do we know? How do we think? What are the categories that shape our thinking? So I don't know. Dave,
one last
I'm no
question
help. I'm no help.
on this, because the break is so clear in the data that the 18 to 29-year-old group
Right.
just soars on this question, and every age group above it is where you would hope and expect it to be. 65 plus 0% believe that it was a myth.
Well, the young ones are the product of a woke system, a postmodern system, critical race theory system. So, I mean, that statistic is very revealing with the generational difference. So we have to ask, how has the education system changed between those generations? I've seen it change in the university, I can tell you that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Professor Chatterjee, please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. Ms. Patterson, thank you so much for your lecture and for what you said about the need to restore the word, the need to restore meaning and humanity. I just wanted to ask you a little bit more, particularly the way in which Wiesel thinks about, as you said, the Holocaust as an assault on the word and on meaning, and connected to what you just said about how postmodernism works in ways to destroy meaning so that your facts are as good as mine. And that is what leads us to the mess that we are in. But Wiesel, in attempting to restore that bond, do you think he's also aware of the difficulties, that it is a constant struggle to restore the bond between word and meaning?
Oh, he is aware.
He's
very
aware.
much, he was aware. He is aware. I mean, he passed away on July 2nd, 2016, but I think he was sitting in on this seminar, perhaps. He's very much aware, and this is an essential, fundamental question that you raise. The Holocaust is an assault on the soul. Wiesel once said that the ultimate mystery of the Holocaust is that whatever happened took place in the soul. It's the soul of the Jew, of the human being, that comes under a radical assault. How do you kill the soul? You kill the human-to-human relationship. The soul it's not in us, it's between us and another. The soul draws its breath from the between space of human-to-human relation. One of the most chilling lines in all of Holocaust literature is in Night, when Eliezer, near the end of the tale, is looking for food for his father, and one of the inmates says to him, "Look, you're in a concentration camp." He says, "Here there are no fathers. There are no sons, there are no brothers, there are no friends." Now, this is a horrifying statement. You destroy the soul by destroying the human relation, and you do that by tearing word from meaning. On the first night of the camp, in the first night, he describes a Polish capo who happened to be a halfway decent guy, who tells the new arrivals, help one another, let there be comradeship among you, don't lose faith, and so on. And he ends at the end of that paragraph, he says, the first human words. They are human words because they're words that sanctify human relation, that draw human beings closer. Where word is tied to meaning, human is tied to human. Okay? We to the extent that we categorize ourselves in terms of race, class, gender, all of the identity politics, we tear words from meaning. We tear human from human. We tear our own souls. And you can see this in the discourse in academia. Words are more and more meaningless. You can see it in social media, in news media, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. I know. So I don't know, and what do we do about it? First of all, I think we should not accept the premise, right? We should question the premise that meaning is relative. Meaning is not relative. As Emmanuel Levinas says, the human face has meaning all by itself, apart from context. The face is an emanation of an absolute holiness that brings with it an absolute ethical demand apart from context, before context. Okay? So I think we have to reject this premise that meaning is always contextual. Context is important, don't get me wrong, but it's not decisive. It's the holiness of the human that imparts meaning to any context, right? And that's, I mean, that's what's coming under assault in the Holocaust, and certainly in the post-Holocaust era. And I think Professor Wiesel was very much aware of that and struggled with it. He was a legendary teacher at Boston University. I knew him personally. I regard him as one of my teachers, but I didn't have the blessing of being in his classroom. However, I know several of his students, and he was amazing.
Thank you, Professor. Before we end, I would like to ask you that in one of your chapters in Annotated Passover Haggadah, you talked about the Talmud, and you said that there is a special place in Talmud where even God goes when he has to weep. So,
Yeah.
Mr. Him. So could you just talk a little bit about it?
Yes, and look, how we think of God is central to how we think of human, and vice versa. Okay, the suffering God. We're told in a midrash that when God was about to create heaven and earth, the angel said, "Don't do it. It's going to hurt you. You're going to suffer." And so in the Torah, where it says God hovered over the face of the deep, the word for hovered, merachefet, also means hesitated. And it brings to my mind that God, he knows this is going to hurt. The infinite one will suffer infinitely. And yet, because creation is an act of infinite love, he goes ahead and gives birth I mean, the Zohar says it's the supernal mother who gives birth to creation, to humanity. And when you become a parent and when you have children, you know it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt. But the love exceeds the pain. So God, knowing this, we're taught, the Talmud teaches, that God created a special place where he could go and weep when his suffering became too much to bear, because he didn't want, if he was afraid if he should weep in front of his creation, it would destroy the creation. We would be overwhelmed by God's weeping. So he created a place to retreat and weep. I mean, it's a beautiful image. And he sends an angel called Metatron to sort of take care of things while he's hiding, while he's in the place of hiding. It's called Mistarim. And if you read of some of the Hasidic assessments of the Shoah, I mean, they'll often invoke this place of hiding. God seems absent, but he's hiding in his infinite suffering. Not that that makes everything better, but it tells us that, you know, God himself is suffering here. God himself is under assault in the Shoah, and I would say on October 7th, where the suffering inflicted, the savagery, the butchery, rivaled anything that I've ever come across. And I've been studying atrocity for a long time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor. And I'll take the liberty of quoting what you always say, that you are closest to God when you wrestle with God.
Yes. Yes. Keep wrestling.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And do join us again on January 8th next year, where we have Professor Bernice Lerner, who's going to talk about vital considerations in teaching Holocaust literature. Thank you so much, Professor Patterson.
Thank you. All blessings. Thank you all.